The Plantation Master's curse, the woman no one dared to buy. Lot 29. The St. Charles Exchange in New Orleans had seen thousands of souls bought and sold, but on that suffocating morning in the spring of 1854, the air itself felt wrong, as if the walls knew what was coming. Heat shimmered beneath the rotunda, linen collars stuck to trembling necks, and every wealthy planter waited for the auctioneer's hammer to echo. But all conversation died the instant she stepped into the light. Lot 29. Her name, according to the bill of sale, was Deline. 22 years old. 5'7". Skin like polished mahogany. Eyes darker than the bottom of a well, and twice as deep. She wasn't the kind of beauty that invited admiration, she inspired silence. Even the most seasoned traders looked away, as though gazing too long might wake something best left asleep. Claude Fourier, the auctioneer, cleared his throat. His voice shook as he announced, "Lot 29, trained in domestic service, needlework, and kitchen duties. Bidding begins at $400. No hands rose. A whisper rippled through the hall. 400 was an insult, a price for the sick or the broken. Yet no man dared to speak. The silence pressed on until the door opened, and James Lavo entered. He wasn't old money, not yet. The son of a cotton merchant, he'd purchased Bellamont Plantation 3 years earlier and was determined to buy refinement by the pound. Fine horses, imported mahogany, a wife with a name older than his. He saw Deline and stopped as if struck. Later he'd claimed that her eyes felt like hands closing around his heart. 1,000 American gold, he declared. Gasps. The auctioneer froze mid-gesture. Sir, the current bid stands at 200. I am aware. An elderly planter, Etienne Deveau, rose trembling. James, reconsider. 3 men have owned that woman. 3 men of wealth, all dead. Each claimed to see her in their dreams before they met their end. Lavo's smile hardened. Superstition. Fear of beauty, nothing more. She is no servant, the old man warned. She is judgment waiting for a name to attach itself to. But pride sealed James's fate. He signed the papers with a flourish, ignoring the quill's quiver in the auctioneer's hand. In the notary's margin, a small note would later appear. Buyer was warned. Proceeded despite unanimous counsel to decline purchase. As the carriage rolled toward Bellamont, Deline sat beside the driver, the humid wind tangling her hair. The driver, Moses, an old hand who'd served the family for 20 years, tried to make small talk. Do you know why no one would bid for you, miss? Deline's lips curved in that calm, knowing way that made even daylight feel cold. Sometimes, she said softly, the universe keeps its own accounts. And some debts must be paid in full. Bellamont Plantation rose ahead, white-columned and proud against the dying sun. On the veranda, Marguerite Lavo waited, thin, elegant, and already uneasy. When she saw Deline step down from the carriage, her knuckles whitened on the railing. James, she whispered, what have you brought into our home? He dismissed her trembling with a wave. A maid, nothing more. But that night, the candles in the kitchen guttered the moment Deline entered. A pot that had simmered for hours suddenly boiled over, spilling across the stove like something alive. Celeste, the housekeeper, would later write in her diary. The air turned colder than the grave. She looked at me, and I felt her see every sin I ever thought hidden. By dawn, whispers had already begun. Servants crossed themselves when Deline passed. Horses refused to move near her window. And though she spoke gently, worked flawlessly, and never once raised her voice, Bellamont felt haunted. James Lavo slept well that night, proud of his purchase. But outside, in the sugarcane fields, a wind rose where none should blow, and in the darkness, something whispered the name of every master who had ever thought himself beyond judgment. The mistress of shadows. By the end of the first week, Bellamont Plantation was no longer the same. The flowers in the courtyard wilted despite the rain, the clocks lost their rhythm, and every mirror in the mansion seemed to fog when Deline passed by. What had once been a proud estate began to feel like a house under siege, not from men, but from memory itself. Celeste, the housekeeper, wrote that each morning felt like waking inside a prayer that God had turned his face away from. In the upstairs rooms, Marguerite Lavo wasted away. Her beauty, the one thing she had guarded like armor, faded beneath dark circles and trembling hands. "She watches me," she told James one evening, her voice shaking. "Even when I sleep, I can feel her eyes. When she brushes my hair, I see faces in the mirror that aren't mine. I see them." James dismissed it. "You're imagining things. Deline is devoted, nothing more." But when he turned away, he realized that even he had begun to hear things, faint voices in the hallways, murmurs of chains dragging across the floorboards, the soft hum of old sorrow carried through the vents. That night, Marguerite screamed. Moses, polishing silver in the kitchen, dropped everything and ran upstairs. He arrived just in time to see her standing at the top of the grand staircase, pale and frantic. Deline was beside her, calm, silent, eyes unreadable. Marguerite's final words were not a cry for help but a whisper of realization. "You're not human." Then she fell. Her body hit the marble steps with a sound that silenced the house. Her neck snapped cleanly, her eyes frozen wide. The coroner ruled it a fall. But Celeste's diary entry for that night said otherwise. She stood at the top, and I swear I saw Deline lift her hand, just a flick of her fingers, gentle as a sigh. Madame went backward like a marionette whose strings were cut. As Deline passed me, she whispered, "One account settled. The balance shifts." 3 days later, Bellamont hosted a funeral that should have been solemn, yet felt eerily hollow. Guests spoke in low voices about the tragedy, but their eyes lingered not on the coffin, on Deline, who stood at the back among the servants, her head bowed, her stillness almost reverent. Father Rousseau, who led the service, later wrote to his bishop. He looked at her as though drowning, desperate for air but unwilling to rise. "I saw no grief in him, only devotion twisted into madness." After Marguerite's burial, James changed. The laughter in him curdled. He spent hours locked in his study, emerging only to dine, and even then, only if Deline joined him. He dismissed the overseer, stopped attending church, and began writing in long ledgers no one else was permitted to touch. One by one, the other servants fled. Those who stayed whispered that Deline no longer obeyed the master obeyed her. "She's got him ridden," said old Ruth in the quarters. "Like in the old country, when a spirit takes a man's body to finish its work." Celeste tried to pray, but each night the candles at her altar burned blue instead of gold. And outside her window, she saw them, shapes moving in the cane fields under the moonless sky. Men and women with no faces, just hollows where eyes should be, walking toward the big house. On June 18th, James Lavo rode into New Orleans and stunned the notary who'd once warned him. He freed Deline. "I see now," he told the clerk. "She was never mine to own. Some debts transcend property law." But Deline didn't leave. She took up residence in Marguerite's former rooms, wore her dresses, sat in her chair at the dinner table. The household grew quieter still. At night the servants heard James weeping behind his locked door, and Deline's low humming, old, foreign, and endless. In Celeste's diary, the entries grew frantic. June 30th, she smiles when men leave this world. The master grows thin. He barely eats. The other night I saw her watching him sleep, her shadow falling over him like a curtain. I think she's collecting something from him, piece by piece. And I think he lets her. The few who dared to speak of it said Deline was building something unseen, a reckoning older than Louisiana itself. By July, the fires of the living had dimmed, and the dead began to stir. Bellamont was no longer just a plantation. It was an altar. The night of reckoning. The summer of 1854 reached its suffocating peak, but at Bellamont Plantation, the air was colder than a grave. The cane fields no longer swayed with life, they leaned inward, as though bowing to something unseen. By mid-August, the servants whispered that the house itself had started to breathe. Floorboards pulsed underfoot, and walls sighed with distant voices that answered to no one living. Inside, James Lavo sat hunched over his desk. Once a proud master, now a hollow ghost of himself, he filled a massive ledger with names, thousands of them, every enslaved soul who had ever passed through Bellamont. Beside him stood Deline, her eyes gleaming with patient fire. "You see it now," she murmured. "Every cruelty leaves a mark. Every sin leaves an echo." James's ink-stained hand trembled. "I thought I'd bought a servant," he rasped. "But you were the one buying me." She smiled, not cruelly, but with ancient sadness. "You were payment. The first name in a new account." That night, the final entry was written. James Pierre Lavos signed beneath his own crimes and closed the book with shaking fingers. Then the singing began. Low at first, a hum rising from the soil. It carried through the fields, the quarters, the stables. Every soul at Bellamont woke in terror as voices joined from nowhere, voices that had not been heard in 100 years. Celeste watched from the hallway as Deline descended the grand staircase, her white gown rippling like smoke. Each step she took lit the air with blue fire. Behind her came the dead, faint at first, then solid, hundreds of them. Men, women, and children, their faces illuminated by sorrow and defiance. "The accounting is complete," Deline declared. "Now comes collection." In the study, James rose unsteadily. "I understand. I accept it." She nodded once. "Then you will become what you owned." Light erupted, not the warm gold of flame, but cold, electric blue that turned night to judgment. James screamed, but not from pain. His body broke apart into smoke, dissolving into the spectral crowd. When it cleared, the Plantation Master was gone. Only the ledger remained on the desk, glowing faintly, pages fluttering though there was no wind. Outside, the cane fields blazed in perfect circles, ritual fires marking graves once hidden. The slaves, freed from fear, stood watching in reverent silence. The songs turned triumphant, the melody older than Louisiana itself. By dawn, Deline was nowhere to be found. Only her voice lingered in the mist. "Justice is patient, but it never forgets." In the days that followed, other plantations whispered of strange events, masters found dead with terror frozen on their faces, ledgers filled with unfamiliar handwriting, the name Deline scrawled across every page. Years later, the Bellamont house burned to ash. Nothing survived except the stone foundation and that single ledger, sealed in the ruins. When it was opened decades later, the writing had continued long after 1854, names and dates stretching forward through time. At the bottom of the final page, one last sentence appeared in dark ink that never faded. "The accounting continues. All debts will be paid." And on quiet Louisiana nights, when the moon hides and the air grows still, travelers say they can still hear her, a woman's voice humming from the ruins, counting softly. One name after another.